Welcome, folks, to the cryptozoology show with your host, the cryptozoologist. And this is going to be about a two, maybe possibly three-part, but I'm going to cover some of the early sort of interesting things here where I, if you're a skeptic and you happen to just come across my channel before, yes, I don't get 10 million subscribers and all this because I don't have the budget, like I said, for these kinds of things. However, the interesting information that I give you is extremely well worth it for any Bigfoot researchers, people, scientists that find that it's impossible and these kinds of things. You're not really understanding what's going on here. And I'm going to show you that categorically it is impossible that this was all made up, just even from what we're going to do here, okay? And that there's actual, like, old photographs and things of Sasquatch like creatures way before the Patterson film and other sorts of things, and that these recordings of people being killed by wild men are so common that how any scientist or any person can keep denying this is mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. What you're suggesting then is for thousands of years here. You have early stuff like Enkidu to all kinds of early. There was a Roman wild man that lived in caves, and they would grab maidens and the same kind of thing, and fight with Roman soldiers when they try and infiltrate the caves. These things have been going on since the earliest times, and every single time the guy's a certain height in between these certain ranges of small little fellows, a sort of thing, which could be children or just sort of like a shorter sort of versions of these, to monster giants in rare places, Alaska and different ones, Russia, different ones where they have these monster guys, right? Like the Solomon Islands and these kinds of things. Mind you, they're not supposed to be as furry, but this kind of idea, right? And they've been around since the earliest times in this, but these are actual real. What I'm going to be covering here is some really early news sort of things, and the consistency every single time. For some scientists to suggest that this is all boogeyman made up in their mind, you're living in a delusionary world. And what's really, as I said, I started projects in the 1970s in school. Okay, going as a young fellow and doing huge projects on this, already talking about wild men. My teacher actually gave me an A+ sort of thing at the time for one of them, right? And this sort of thing. And I showed all these sort of old newspaper clippings and all kinds of things that I was able to manage even to get by this point. I had relatives from over in Europe and other places that would send me these wacky things and all kinds of things. And so my belief since young is that many of them are humans. They're not actually. I know a lot of these gigantopithecus people are all thrilled with this sort of idea, but and people hate the idea that some furry man here is outsmarting you. They can't believe it, right? It's just not feasible in their mind, and so they tend to put them as an ape and these sorts of things. Yes, there is wild apes that have not been discovered as well that is mixed in amongst these sort of things, but many of these things are actually based on ancient origins all over the place. You can find, and I'll cover this in the second and third parts, possibly. It'll probably take 3 shows to do this because it's quite a bit of sort of information. But the thing is that since time began, since the earliest times, there has been these people with hypertrichosis, okay, and these sorts of things. And there's also been giants found in gazillions of caves worldwide, all over the place, new ones still being found. And these people, why is not scientists or Bigfoot researchers or any of these people not getting this? I don't understand. I really don't. Everybody just cannot stand that that they're wild humans that are outsmarting you. These wild humans have been living amongst us since the ancientest time, since the flood, right? And now many scientists worldwide are all agreeing there must have been a flood. because now they're switching because there's so much proof now that it's right, and these kinds of things, and again with the dating of the earth, as I showed you there on Mount St. Helens, all these layers that claim to be millions of years were created in one night over in Mount St. Helens. So how do you think that these things, there's been recent finds even in forests and things like this where these giant holes will just all of a sudden appear and poof like this. They'll drop everything down, and so the creatures all look like as if, even though they died just a year ago, now they're 80 feet down in the ground, and then some filled up the hole again and cemented. Now it sort of fossilizes them and keeps them there. So in your mind, you think that they're millions of years old, but really this occurred just a while ago, right? Sort of thing. And this, what I'm saying is that forgetting what you haven't found fossilized records and all that sort of thing. What you have found is giants in caves all over the place, from the United States, different countries all over the world. Some are dated at even hundreds of years old, and whole packs of them where they found 7, 8, 9, 10. You got your giants from Nevada, with Sarah Winnemucca up to 11 feet tall. Although a lot of people keep claiming that there isn't evidence of this, they're completely wrong. Their skulls are in a museum in Arizona. There's fur there that they still have of them, and these sorts of things. And every time when these Bigfoot researchers nowadays, they keep quite often they'll try and get some Bigfoot with snaring them or different sorts of things. There was up around Eagle Lake and all that sort of Snobgrove Lake, I think it's called. I've been to 10 trillion lakes. Anyways, it's this one lake here in Ontario actually had all kinds of the same kinds of reports with people, some kind of wild ape man shooting rocks at their cabin and all kinds of things. And so the guy put out a trap and put sort of the like nails on the ground, and this poor Sasquatch creature actually stepped in it, right? And the saying is that a lot of times they're coming back, they're saying they're human, but with other sort of 98% human, 99% human, but with some anomalies, right? You're not getting this. This is the thing. This is what they are. They're humans that have diverse from us, slightly different. They've been living in caves for massive ages. Some have only been living in caves not that long, but it doesn't take them long for them to start turning into looking like this guy here, Jojo. Okay, and this is the thing is, and I'm going to show you some fascinating things that'll really interest. It's very interesting, like I mean, big time, you know. So here, November 1282, we're going to cover this place called Connaught Chase over in England with the pig man, where Jean Guy claims he heard the severe oinking of pig man. These kinds of things. That's a separate phenomenon, more sort of recent things, but you will find this absolutely fascinating. There's very interesting stuff. This Roger de Mainland in 1282 on the Connaught Chase led a hunting party with the Bishop of Lichfield or Lichfield, when one of the riders was hit in the head by a rock thrown from the oak trees. Hit in the head by a rock. Native accounts all over the world, the guy's telling you the same thing, that these wild primitive humans are shooting rocks. This is in 1282. There's no way that they saw the National Enquirer then and knew what a Bigfoot was. There was no gorillas. There was no nothing. No monkeys hanging around there. No anything to influence these people. Here's the drawings of them here on the right-hand side, right? Okay. So now a huge, hairy, naked man, after the guy was knocked off. He fell off of his horse, right? He's half knocked out. A huge, hairy, naked man with great strength leaped out of the trees and jumped on another horseman, knocking him off. The bishop then raised his cross, flashing light at the creature's eyes, and I guess it panicked it somehow, which is great. I mean, I doubt that really it was the cross itself, even though, like I said, I don't believe in all this sort of gobbledygook that we came from a chimp and all this sort of thing. I do believe that there's some kind of supernatural power out there, whatever these people are. I don't know if they're aliens or whatever God is at the end of the day. That I have no idea. But I know that there's spaceships in the skies if somebody's flying these things, right? Right? And it makes all sense because all your ancient relatives are telling you that these beings came down. If I was somebody and primitive like that in those kinds of times, right, and I see this thing come down, I would think they were godlike too. I mean, so whether they really, whatever a god really is, right, that's a totally different sort of thing. But the thing is that these people, okay, since it could be that just simply the cross kind of shined in the creature's eyes and freaked him out or something. Who knows, right? Like that sort of thing. Okay, so but now here's the thing: the bishop offered rewards for finding the wild man's lair, aka woodwose, wilderman, green man, and other variations, and they never found him. Okay, so this guy actually sadly died about 3 days later, 2 or 3 days later, in the hospital, sort of thing, or whatever, whoever was taking care of him, sort of thing. And so this is like recorded things here. And I find scientists, when you're talking silly like this, where you keep denying these things, there's something wrong here. Like, I mean, seriously, you can't just keep saying this. I mean, not every single time this guy's going to be able to manage to say that the monster's 6 to 10 feet tall. He's completely covered with fur. He has no clothes on. He has strength like Godzilla. He has super long arms, giant feet. I mean, come on, seriously, this cannot be imagination every time, and especially when people are murdered by it. This is one of the earlier known cases of an actual killing of from a woodwose by him chucking a rock here in your head, right? Sort of thing here. Canuck Chase 1290. Miners open up shaft, see giant hairy wild men and women in a group of 8. The creatures threw stones at them again, and the miners retreated. Okay, so this is ages later now. Now you got a totally separate event. They wouldn't know about this guy previous already, probably, because I noticed that Bigfoot researchers, even today, they don't seem to have any clue as to older things, and all of them are, oh well, it can't be. It's not in the fossil record. It must be this, and it can't be a human. And he's got to be a Gigantopithecus, and all these kinds of things. They're not getting this. Like seriously, man, this is really a fact that there is wild humans, okay, that have always been around us. They either are chucked out of villages, freaks, and also ones that were living naturally, maybe after the flood, that escaped the flood. Little groups of them survived, and they became these sorts of things over time. And it probably doesn't take that long. As I explained to you, now scientists are finally starting to realize that creatures can actually change and adapt very quickly, sometimes decades, where the creature used to be like this, now he's slightly different because of the terrain and all this. So what they imagine in their mind takes millions of years could be 5 minutes, right? And this sort of thing. So our systems, our bodies, are created like a computer genius. Every animal in the world, doesn't matter what it is, a plant or whatever it is, it's computer like genius. It has a program here where if something's not occurring right for it, that it can adapt by make growing something newer, bigger, whatever, and that sort of thing. But it doesn't go beyond a certain thing. It stays still in the family like sort of thing. You never see a case of a wolf turning into a moose, right? But you do see wolves that keep changing in different varieties. There's different all kinds of sizes and different sort of specimens of them because they adapted and were isolated in different areas and changed, right, to fit the sort of environment. Now, here, an educational book, 13th century from Norway, mentions the wilderman matching 100% of Bigfoot today. One was captured in Ireland, the text said, and they could not get it to speak any language and it would screech. Okay, and you can see here that this is from the 13th century. I mean, so, you know, I mean, seriously, it's mind boggling how people sort of are not getting what's really actually occurring here. This is a fact that we have wild humans living amongst us. In the part 2, I'll show you modern examples that were actually brought into hospitals and things like this. And you'll 100% look at the guy and you'll say, oh my God, that's Bigfoot, right? And this is the sort of thing. People aren't getting this. And they need to start doing this. And you shouldn't be going out and shooting these because they're wild humans. That's what they probably are in at least about 80% of cases. And the rest of the stuff is a mixture of a few unknown sorts of ape species. In some areas, there's all kinds of unknown ape species that they're reporting where it isn't a wild man. But altogether, worldwide, there's always these wild men. There's also a chimp like sort of variety. Some have tails, like monkeys, sort of men, and things like that. We'll cover that in the second or third show and that sort of thing, where they did the same thing, cannibalistic killing and that sort of thing, right? And this is way before world monkeys were sort of known in most areas and these kinds of things, right? So, but I'm just asking scientists to sort of like look at the consistency. When you're a scientist, I have like I'm the only probably cryptozoologist in the entire world where I saw an unknown animal. Okay, I analyzed and planned a way of catching the thing, and within one shot, one day, I captured an unknown weasel species here in the Ottawa region. I got photographs of it, took it to scientists, and some scientist guy was actually supposed to describe it. So, this why I'm asking other sort of cryptozoological people to sort of hear me out, because I do have an incredible success sort of rate with these kinds of things. And my every time when I don't go Bigfoot hunting much or any of these kinds of things, but a vast majority of my life I ran across a lot of strange things because for some reason I seem to have this sort of luck and I think outside the box, right? If it was me that was hunting Sasquatch, I would be at finding a consistent area where they're hopefully being seen even modern. I'm going to find a stream and water source that is nearby that hopefully there isn't much else, right? Closer one from, like, there isn't one, a bunch of them. It's better to have just one or two in the sort of area. And that guaranteed there's caving systems up near it somewhere, okay? You people, which they should be doing is starting to put remote traps and pointing them down at cameras sort of places. Stop putting Bigfoot cameras at 8 feet and these kinds of things. Put them way up in trees, 30, 40, 50 feet, and point them down at angles so that they can shoot down and get down to the bottom. So when the Bigfoot guy comes by, that you're actually getting a whole portion of them instead of some parts of it. A hunt around berry patches, the consistency of thousands of reports of native people and everybody over the centuries. I have massive hundreds of my own, but all together from different stuff, the BFRO people and all kinds of other ones. I know it's got to be in the several thousand anyway, sort of thing, where you have this consistency around berry picking. Okay, so these are the major things, and also fish barrels. Okay, there's a 17th century story that you can find about this lady. She was way out in the northern Canada, and her whole family was sort of, her kids were outside. This giant ape man come along, and he started smashing the barrels and ripping off her fish, right? And she describes them and everything. I mean, 100 billion% of Sasquatch, like these guys are describing, or any of the other ones, right? Except they call them woodwose or whatever, right? It's wild man, right? And this sort of thing. And this is the thing is that we got to start realizing that they're actually probably wild humans in a lot of cases. We shouldn't be having the right to shoot them, but we need to discover them and prove that they actually exist. So therefore, these sorts of areas then can be sort of, you know what I mean, turned into sort of like any one where it seems like a few of them around. You now, this is nature reserve like stuff here, because this is ancient humans here that have been living in amongst us. Some are feral, more modern ones, and sort of things like that, all mixed in. But this is guaranteed as what is really occurring here, and you'll see this. Okay, here a wild hairy girl was captured in France, 1731, and she was dubbed Maria LeBlanc, and was eventually trained to speak. One of the very few that's ever done this. She fully originally was loaded in hair. Here's her original picture. Is that not Bigfootish to you? Right? Sort of thing like this. But in her case, she wasn't one of the giant ones, right? She was actually a feral human. But the point is you can see how clearly it doesn't take massively long. Your body, probably in these cave like environments or weird things in the forest, naturally seems to probably know to start beefing up the hair to keep you warm or this sort of thing, right? Or whatever, right? Some kind of reasonings like this. So here's what she looked like after they shaved her down and yeah, you know what I mean, started teaching her language. She was one of the few that could ever sort of do this, because usually when they find wild people, all they can do is screech and grunt and they can't get them past that, right? But for some reason, she was one of these rare ones where they actually were able, and she actually became a part of, well, society and this sort of thing, okay? So to deny that a Bigfoot like human being exists, there's one right in front of you that was captured. Okay? Now, here, in 1797, Victor of Avron was captured, okay, in France, in Avron, France. And but he could not speak and escaped several captures previous. Originally, he was said to be naked, covered in fur, and had wild strength. Okay. Here's another fascinating one. 1797, Canuck Chase riots due to rabbit breeding introduced. So what they did is some people decided they were going to breed all these sort of rabbits, and they built these big cages and all that sort of thing. And so the locals got all upset that was around there and didn't like this sort of thing. So they set the fire to the rabbit enclosures. And one time doing this, the forest caught fire and a giant hairy naked man set in flames was captured. Okay, so the guy was captured already. We already have, like I said, numerous of these, right? But sadly, people didn't do anything about them at the time, or no scientist guy, yeah, you know what I mean, analyzed it too much. They tried to get him to jail, but he overpowered them and escaped on his way to jail. In 1805, a Canuck Chase hairy naked man with a face like a pig's grunted and oink like sounds at two women riding in a carriage. The horses panicked, taking them on a wild ride. Not until a mile away, and then the horses had calmed down, and that was the end of it. But here's an actual sort of a early sort of a drawing of sort of the what the creature was running, and he was set in flames, and they said he was a giant and covered with fur and that sort of thing, right? But they thought he might have been some kind of, you know, wild guy that had was wanted or something, some kind of insane guy and this kind of thing. This is how they would always explain it back in those days. Then they'd get rid of the problem. Nobody ever thought of calling the scientist guy, right? Okay, now here, Canuck Chase. Here's a fascinating murder here. 1767. The Hudson sisters, going along Canuck Chase for a horse ride after church, were attacked by a woodwose. One of the girls was brought to a cave and was found partially eaten. The other sister escaped but was shot by accident by a posse looking for them. So the poor girl's trying to escape, running around. I guess, yeah, you know, there's posses all over the place. They seen something moving and they shot her, right? Awful shame. She could have, yeah, you know what I mean, filled out a lot more stuff. Maybe people would have believed that there's such a thing after her sister is murdered, and yeah, you know what I mean, and this sort of thing, right? But Canuck Chase here, 1829, miners have collapsed and rescuers think dead, digging for them, find them alive a couple of days later. And they now here's what the miners said: a woodwose had dug a tunnel on the side and allowed oxygen to reach them. They said that their lamps were just going out and there was barely any sort of oxygen around, and all of a sudden some kind of big giant fist busted through sort of the side of the wall, and all of a sudden from another chamber in these air was going through. Now, who's going to make this up? Seriously, you're stuck in a sort of thing. They find this giant hole with a subterranean cavern, another one that they didn't even know existed. They found it. It was right there what the guy had said, right? So doctors, now, of course, this is the scientist guy that we listen to today. People want to see Bigfoot, and they live in the and they see shadows in the forest and this sort of thing. This doctor said the same thing. He said that he must have been, yeah, you know, short of oxygen and all that sort of thing, and must have hallucinated it, right? Okay, but since then the mining stopped, and over hundreds of miles of tunnels are down there, and probably all kinds of other chambers that they didn't even know. Right? No one since so absolutely fascinating, and also since then all kinds of people reported everything from witches, pig and wolf man like sort of things, and other sort of weird variants to them. Right? But I mean, for sure these two ladies were killed. The guy, their father, Lord Hudson, okay, found them, and sort of the whole sort of thing here. Here's the sort of one. This was in 1767. Okay, now here the woolly girl of Ipswich. Emma Watterson was sold to a circus due to she had hypertrichosis, and she then escaped in 1847 to Cannock Chase Forest for at least several years. The poor girl met a poet and would meet him secretly in the area. Okay, so because she could speak, I guess, some kind of language here a little bit, not because they had her sort of, they probably taught her as they had her caged up and all that sort of thing. When she escaped, right? This poet John Ralph started meeting her and talking to her and this sort of thing. And then one time he went to meet her, right? And this giant hairy brute, a woodwose, was actually with her. And so she looked like she was sad and sort of downed out now. And then in his mind, he said, "Oh my goodness, she must have found an actual a proper mate for her that would be suitable for her because they both had this sort of thing." And he said that this guy was a giant furry brute. He was fully naked but covered with fur, just like her, right? And this sort of thing. And the brute sort of growled and looked at the poet guy a bit weird and dragged her off and sort of thing like this. So I wonder if she was able to communicate with him to a certain degree to say to leave this guy alone, that he's a friend, right? And this sort of thing. Who knows, right? But absolutely fascinating. But she disappeared and was never seen again. So maybe even some of her offspring and children that they might have had, this couple or her and this woodwose guy, maybe some of them are still around Canuck Chase as far as you know. Maybe some of them had weird sort of deformities, like the pig looking sort of thing, or whatever, right? It'd be feasible, any of these sorts of things. Okay. Here, a Botany Bay giant. This beast was captured in Botany Bay, 1700s. Here's a depiction of him. Notice he is typical size of Bigfoot size of today and no neck. You can clearly see him here. You can see his head sitting right on his shoulders, right? And they actually dragged this guy in, and they were able to sort of talk to him a little bit and do sort of they were able to train him small little sort of things, but they'd actually captured him in this Botany Bay, a whole gang of them somehow with ropes and chains and all kinds of different stuff. They circled around him and somehow got him, right? Okay, in Galapagos, Ohio, 1869, a family riding a carriage were attacked by a giant hairy wild man who leaped on the father, and the daughter got stones and hit the beast. The beast then shrieked and bolted off. Posses were formed to catch the wild man, but they never found him. Akron, Ohio, 1880s. Hairy man gorilla lived in cave and would howl at night and tried to kidnap maidens, as well as blamed on cattle to pets missing on and off over the years. Besides aliens hovering over DuPont plant, numerous giant hairy hobos over 8 feet tall were reported seen in the forest behind the plant in early times, like, just when it first started the plant. I forget the dates here. It might have been early 1900s or whatever, 1920s, 30s, whatever, something like that. No name Bigfoot, no one presumed they were feral humans, and so they thought they were these giant furry sort of feral humans that were hobos that were living around there, right? The Akron Evening Journal, turn of the 20th century, reported wild men being seen and beds made of grass found. Same nests like Yeti makes to others across the world, mentioning this over 1,000 years ago. Okay, so there you go. Another sort of, how is it every single time the guy's exactly the same? And who's going to write these big giant articles and do all this sort of thing? Why isn't the guy 40 feet tall? Why didn't he have two heads? Why is it every single time identical? It could only be this if it was real. Okay, I'm telling you, Right. Here's some more here. 1897, two wild hairy children were seen often living in a cave until one winter got real cold and they likely perished. Late 1800s to wartime, a naked werewolf man lived in behind Ottawa, Canada's Parliament buildings and would drink booze, howl naked in front of the Parliament. One of my earlier ancient relatives actually had a run-in with this guy. I believe I can't remember exactly what was this guy in 1920. That could be wrong. Sort of, there could be a bit, but anyways, this guy, it was fascinating. One of these crazy stories. My relative had a sort of an interaction with this character around the lovers lane and stuff with his lady friend at the time and this sort of thing, and this guy would actually he could barely speak, but he grunted and stuff. He was fully covered with hair, looked exactly like a werewolf. He had pointed ears, and they would make him wear clothes, and he would walk around. And this is right here in Ottawa, Canada, right? And they would make this guy walk around in this sort of in the clothing. But every time what he'd do is he'd mooch booze off some of the early people from the Chateau Laurier Hotel and these different ones in the Parliament around that were around at that time. And he would mooch booze off them, get totally wasted, and go right up in front of the Parliament buildings and rip off all his clothes and howl there at the moonlight, right? So just like a werewolf and this sort of thing. So absolutely fascinating yeah, one of the funny theories was is that that Sir Wilfrid Laurier might have had raised this guy like in the occult here, and it was a possible real loup de garou that was living around there. That sort of thing. But you can see here, cave children of Coniston, right? And this, I mean, these are people knowing this and seeing them every year and this sort of thing. So what I'm saying this is this wouldn't matter if this happened 3,000 years ago, 5 minutes ago. The thing is that human beings do start turning seemingly furry quite often under these kinds of situations, and that they have the ability to survive. So if they can survive and find another one to mate with, this is enough of this foolishness every sort of time over the centuries everywhere, where that's why they're rare. Yeah, like I said, I believe like about 80% of Bigfoot reports are, yeah, you know what I mean, out to lunch and not, they're just people that want to get on a bandwagon, right? That sort of thing. But when you have these ancient ones and these sort of things like this, it's impossible because there's no sort of way that the guy in Ohio is going to know that this beast does the same thing as somebody at Connaught Chase, right? And these kinds of things like that. The news wasn't spread out properly enough for these kinds of things. So totally non feasible, right? So as a scientist, looking, I've studied ichthyology since a tiny child, and this sort of thing like that. I'm familiar with fish species all over the world, and I can identify the vast majority of any sort of freshwater fish from here to South America, especially all the major ones that you would angle for, and that sort of thing like that. And so I look at a scientific like mine, and I have to realize in my mind that yes, I could be just a scientist guy living in a laboratory, and I really don't live in the wilderness 24 hours a day. And maybe I'm being a bit sort of because you have to realize that you're dealing with wild human beings that have the same kind of intelligence like us to a certain degree, and they know to evade you. And when something's twice your size and 10 times your strength, most of the time, the half of these reports, right? When people go looking for this sort of thing, do you think that some posse is going to be able to find this properly? No, because the guy can outdistance you by massive amounts here. He can travel 10 times faster, likely, than you can. So, no matter how many guys who go with the doggies and everything, they can't keep up the speed to catch something like that. This guy can vanish in a flash. All of them that would live around the area would have to know their caving systems. They would have to have hold up areas, and even if they're rogue guys that just walk around, they still would have to have in each area. They probably have nothing better to do. They're not working 24 hours a day. Yeah, they may be working to live, but I mean in the general sense, sort of they're around their forest all the time, constantly, so they're going to know every crack, crevice, and every sort of thing to evade you quite quickly, right? And then these dogs won't go a certain point. A lot of them are petrified of these things from smells of them and all this sort of thing. So people have to keep this sort of thing in mind, that it's totally not feasible that people consistently keep making up the same exact story time after time after time. Now, here's some physical evidence that could have solved this maybe ages ago. And in fact, I have another article identical to this where somewhere in the United States a gorilla like skull like this was found, and you'd swear to God it was the same drawing. It's near identical, and I can't find this article. It's driving me nuts, but I'd like to put it in one of the others too. But here in 1926, a huge gorilla-like skull was found on Canuck Chase by 4 children playing. The father brought it to a vet expert, and he thought it might be a gorilla's. It was found around an old fort called Castle Ring, and you can see it there. But you can see here clearly, I mean, you can see that's not a human. Absolutely not. So, and there is no known gorillas that should be running around in Canuck Chase. And if there was, well, then even if they were wild gorillas that have turned cannibalistic sometimes or whatever, it's still there's a Bigfoot like guy living in there, right? Here's his skull, right? So this is these scientists when they talk silly like this. There's absolutely thousands of these giant bones that have been found in caves all over the place matching the description of a Sasquatch, and you guys just keep calling them giant humans, not understanding that they're really the same thing. It is exactly the same thing. Most of these giant humans probably were furry living in a cave, right? And this sort of thing like this. But here's, the people didn't make as much sort of, the papers and all the kinds of things were much more serious, like to a certain degree, and more reliable. People just in general were more honest and that sort of thing, right? So you have to keep these things in mind, that to keep denying these massive sorts of and this is just a micro smidgen of the massive hundreds that I could go through here of this sort of thing, right? But the thing is, here you're asking for physical evidence. The problem is that a vast majority of people, when they find these things, they don't know a scientist guide. They don't think of these kinds of things, right? So it ends up being, yeah, left there and buried in sitting on somebody's shelf someplace. Nobody knows what it is, and but, yeah, you know what I mean. Eventually, the shack burns down. That's the end of it. It's gone, right? And that sort of thing over the ages, right? And this sort of thing. Now here, 1903, Georgia Dulgy. Okay, this guy here, he was blamed. There was all these sort of cattle mutilations that were happening around there, right? And so the locals thought that probably this guy, because they were more racist back in those days and that sort of thing, and this guy was seen around some of the areas where the cattle were killed, right? But they were killed really strangely, not like what a human would do. So Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself, the guy Sherlock Holmes, you telling me you don't think this man's intelligent? There's 5 zillion Sherlock Holmes films of today still floating around. Everybody thinks he was a genius, elementary, my dear Watson, right? And what Sherlock Holmes would say, if you eliminated everything else, whether it's improbable or not, that's the answer, right? And Sir Arthur Conan Doyle looked at the sort of evidence, and he was completely, so he actually got public to get this guy released, because the killings kept happening after they arrested the guy. They never found any sort of thing of anybody. They could never prove who was doing it or whatever, right? And that sort of thing. But they blamed this dude. But all of the rest of them that had seen, and even some had seen and said that was a wild man that was doing it. But Sir Arthur Conan Doyle himself, okay, had actually said that he believed it was a starving woodwose that was, you know what I mean, desperate because it was a rough winter, right? And that sort of thing like that. Here's one of the earliest photos ever sort of taken of a Sasquatch by a news reporters, and that sort of thing. And here's one of them here, this one here. Now, skeptics had claimed that it was some kind of delusionary shadow or something, but I do find it interesting. There's a couple interesting things about this photograph. If it was a dude in a suit, it's too perfectly dark here. there should have been sort of other sorts of things, and the guy has a cranium, it's pointed. And it looks like his head's actually sitting on the shoulder, unlike a typical sort of human being. Also, his arms seem quite long for a person in a suit. So I'm fairly convinced that that actually probably was an actual real sort of a photograph of one, right? Sort of thing like that. But now here, this is really interesting. Okay, 1965 to 67, three girls murdered Canuck Chase. Rumors of bones found in cave look like they were eaten. Police discount and say it was a fox den, right? Because they didn't want to deal with this sort of thing, right? And they hushed it up, right? But these three girls were killed over between 65 to 67. They find bones in a cave, the same thing, the cave, and this sort of thing like this, right? Now get a load of this. This is the most amazing sort of thing. This is the earliest Sasquatch recording that I know of, and I guarantee you that was not a guy, this was not some gimmick from the news. This was not some made up sort of thing. I'm going to play you the reel there next, okay? I'm going to stop this for a second. I'll play you the reel, and then we'll get back to this a little bit. But this inspector here, okay, when they started asking and the guy started denying, saying, no, it must have been a fox den, and all of a sudden you hear, like this as they're doing the interview, the thing's actually screaming in the background, and they picked it up. Besides the 1970s Sierra recording, okay, which I guarantee you was also not a guy playing a game. I've been around campers since a tiny little child, listening to the craziest drunks you could possibly imagine, where they're hooping and hollering and pretending they're werewolves and screaming and doing silly things. I watched a guy being chased, yelling like a werewolf, running along the Ottawa River, and there was a cliff, and the police were chasing him, and the guy actually had a 2-4 with him, and he leaped right off of the cliff with the 2-4 and screaming and howling. Like, I mean, I've heard all this from even really, really big people, and I guarantee you this is not a human being that's making that sounds. Yes, they're wild humans, but they have a totally different vocal tract and big chests and all this kind of things that they can make sounds that we cannot do. Okay, so this is really fascinating. I'll play you this next here in a second, and you'll see it's absolutely fascinating. I mean, absolutely fascinating. So we'll do that here in a second, and then.
Very strange noise.
We wish to extend our gratitude to the general public, some of whom have been helping search the chase for many hours.
I'm sorry, Inspector. We just went from that noise to... How does it fox?
Doubt it.
Okay, sorry, Inspector. Perhaps I'll ask the question again.
So isn't that fascinating? Now you listen to that, right? You got to admit that does not sound like a human being, and it can't be a wolf. Absolutely not, right? Okay, so now get a load of this. Now, 1960s here, these photographer there from the thing, because a bunch of people were seeing them. Get a load of this. Look at this photograph. That is absolutely, because this guy had an incredibly good kind of camera for those eras, right? He's one of the few that he had to do it with a long telephoto lens. Now I can clearly see there's muscles in this creature's legs. Look at the bend on him, like what the Patterson ape would do. See the bend there where she's got, or he's got his legs here. I presume this looks more like a male to me. Just, it seems the females have a wider sort of bottom to them and that sort of thing, like more booty sort of idea. But you can clearly see that this guy's head's right built into his shoulders here, and you can actually see muscles. I really do not believe that that was a suit. And I also, yeah, you know, these This is a well-respected sort of photographer from a well-respected newspaper and this sort of thing. And yeah, really, I find this one of the more credible sort of pictures I've ever seen of a Sasquatch-like creature. I can see muscles in it all over the place. There's no way that you would have had a suit like that in those eras. Absolutely not. So here's another sort of a fascinating sort of thing there that you got to admit. Now, right around the same time, there was actually probably one of the earliest Bigfoot films ever a thing, and I watched it. I don't have the whole clips here, but you can see that dark object there, and you can actually see in the film him walking up amongst the trees. He looks kind of similar to the one previous. It's darker there. Maybe it was the same dude, as far as I know, but the thing is that that is not definitely a human being in some kind of wearing a knapsack or any of that sort of thing. You can see that he's furry of some sort, and he's completely dark from head to toe, right up the thing. The same thing, you can see that his head looks more as right built on his shoulders, right? Okay, and this sort of thing like that. So absolutely fascinating, very, very, very fascinating. Okay, so you got to admit these things are just way too much, and everybody, the United States Bigfoot researchers keep trying to make these, silly statements saying that the Bigfoot is sort of like, yeah, you know what I mean. The British and these other ones are copying off of them. No, this is not the case. These stories were around way before our Canadian or North American ones, except by natives, right? And this sort of thing like this. And these are all over the place, like I said, worldwide, not only, and this sort of thing like this. So how scientists could keep denying this, I find mind-boggling to me. Okay, here Bigfoot 70 still being seen, Bigfoot seen on Canuck Chase, right? Still to this date, and these modern researchers, like I've seen the Mr. Redford and all these guys. What's that other fellow's name? The one with the hat there. He wears a cowboy hat. Uh, I know he has a show there about right now. I think he's on some kind of show hunting creatures in Alaska or something like that. Mr. Gerhardt, and that fellow there. There's a lot of information I've seen him and some of the other ones say that they should watch some of my shows there, and because some of the things that are mentioned, there's actually yeah, and like I said, I am definitely one of the earlier cryptozoologists out there. When you would, and unlike a lot of these people, I actually do been studying zoology, ichthyology since a tiny child, and reading ichthyology books, like scientific books, right? And I, like I said, I'm more of a fish expert than even animal expert, but I do know a ton of animals from across the world and that sort of thing, like that, and the thing is that a lot of these people are not historically sort of they don't know the historic backgrounds of these things, and they think a lot of these things, they're always skeptical, or they think it's this and that, but no, these stories have been around since the time as we can get here, and they're always the same. And even lots of photographs, some films, all kinds of things, bones all over the place that people are saying are wild humans, which really are the same thing, right? And nobody's getting this, and it fascinates me. It really does. And so here's another interesting thing that I did a project about this in the 1970s. After actually seeing this early sort of British show and this sort of thing like this about this sort of thing, and also reading a few early sort of cowboy books and different ones where these guys mentioned that there was these sort of stag people, and they're like big giant, 6, 8, 9 feet tall, sort of thing like this. They have stag horns of a similar size to a typical stag. Here's an early drawing here of some cowboys there, and you can see the stag guy, and he's standing up, right? And over 500 years these have been reported that I found, and maybe even way earlier than that, but I've at least about 500-600 years here that you can find of these sorts of things from the United States, Europe, England, France, and different places, where random individuals in their diaries and all kinds of things mentioned that they saw this Stagman, where the guy is with a bunch of does and a pack, right? And it's only one guy, and he stands up. But one guy mentioned something really interesting. He said that it looked like he had a helmet on his head. Okay, that it was like a stuffed stag's head put on the guy, and he said that he was furry and he thought maybe he was a shaman of some sort. This guy was a bit more observant than any of the other sort of stories that I've seen, where this is my belief. What if it's feasible that wild men, okay, a Bigfoot, aka Bigfoot, and this sort of thing like this, and you get these same stories from especially around Lake Michigan and certain areas where over the age of certain tribal groups have said that there's these sort of stag people, right? So it's not only one place; it's random around, but the thing is that if they are wild humans, they might develop the same kind of behavior in different areas. I would do the same thing if I was a starving guy too. I mean, this is how I snuck up and caught that cryptozoological little weasel, by hiding in the sort of thing, blending right in with the grass, using traps, baiting the guy, right, and putting out sort of things to get him to lead there and keep shooting things in the hole to get his attention, right? And then I backed off, hid, and hours in the grass, and finally one of them came out, right? There was at least two of them in there. You could hear them screeching. I only got a photograph of one of them. But the thing is that this is the kind of methods that I would use, the same sort of thing if I was having to sneak up on something. That's a great idea. So what if they're primitive humans? The Bigfoot guy's now killed a stag of some sort, right? So now he's got this. He may then sort of have intelligence enough to figure out to make us some kind of a hat-like thing, right? Like a shaman would sort of do. And then you put this on, and then you could sneak up, and you're the group, right, of deer and that would then maybe think of him as sort of thing like this, and then maybe could catch them easier and this sort of thing, right? So it's feasible. Now, some of the reports, they do claim that the guy had deer feet, right? So this I don't know. It could be that there is such a thing as a staggy, like sort of Bigfootish like creature. I mean, I can't say that there isn't, but I highly suspect that maybe they just thought that or whatever, right? Like at the time or that sort of thing. But this one guy's account convinces me that maybe this is how the other ones occurred too, is that simply that it is feasible that some wild humans would have enough intelligence to sort of come up with some kind of gimmick like this to make it easier for them to hunt, to sneak up on the prey, right? And that's a thing like that. And so these things are really interesting. You got to admit. I mean, absolutely a fascinating sort of a thing to them, right? And it really makes you wonder what's like going on here. But there's actually tons of these reports. Okay, and I'll do a whole separate show about this sort of thing like this, but just to tell you, this is interesting. Just in very recent times, orangutans and different ape species that they were monitoring for decades, different sort of scientific groups that had no influence, sort of like they weren't taught by anybody or these kinds of things. These apes are now learning to use primitive tools and making spears themselves and spearing fish and animals. Holy mackerel! Holy mackerel. So, if an orangutan or a basic chimp like creature can sort of do this, right? Why are we this silly to believe that, yeah, you know what I mean, especially if they're human, right, that they wouldn't be able to do these sorts of things and certainly know that we're their enemy? What do you think would have happened in ancient days like the Botany Bay guy or any of these other ones, right? Once your group sees that one of you have been killed somehow by a native guy or whatever, you learn eventually that these guys, and you would tell your crowd, right? I would do the same thing, or any sort of, it wouldn't matter, like even the most simplest of creatures do all kinds of motherly things. They have really good methods of protecting their children. They have certain burrows and all kinds of things that they make, and they hunt in certain ways because they learn to do these sort of things and they pass it on to their kin, right? So the same thing could have applied in this sort of thing like that. So again, the reason why you're nobody's ever catching a Sasquatch very easily is multi reasons. A vast majority of people are not going to have a proper sized gun that could ever sort of do, unless you got a fluke in a trillion here, right? Where you got the guy right in the eyeball and it went through into his skull, or maybe got him right in the neck in the center, or some kind of crazy thing where now he's severely bleeding to death, he starts choking or whatever. He can't run too far before finally collapses over, right? But the odds of that is, yeah, a zillion to one almost, because most people are going to be panicked. The thing's running at you. 90% of the time they're probably going to miss, and even the greatest sharpshooters and all that sort of thing, the guy's probably going to panic a little bit when some 12-foot dude's running at you, right? So the odds of him, and most people are trained, like even police or different ones, to shoot in certain areas. So it could be that just the average hunter guy that did run across one of these shot in an area where, I mean, come on, seriously, the guy's like 1,000 pounds, 1,500 pounds, maybe more, who knows, and these kinds of ranges, 800 to whatever, or the average sort of ones, right? They got muscles like Mount Vesuvius here. The little 22 like gun isn't going to sort of be able, so unless this guy's got some kind of giant elephant gun, which is below zero chance that some one of these guys are going to have that, right? This is why almost never Bigfoot like sort of things are caught. So only in a flukes in a million where all of a sudden a gang runs across him and he's out in an open field and there's nowhere for the Bigfoot guy to go. There's been some that were captured even by a rodeo cowboy. One of them was captured and that sort of thing. Well, actually more than one, but one of these main stories that I can remember, they ran across this open huge field and all of a sudden saw this big giant 8-foot hairy sort of wild man, and they lassoed him and got him into jail and stuff, but there's no mention of what they did with the guy after that, right? And this the problem is back in those sort of eras and things like that, they didn't sort of keep up with these sort of things. It was just a flash in the paper at the time, and then they moved along, right? It's newer news or whatever, right? It wasn't sort of followed up on these sorts of things, sadly. So this gives you just a basic idea of then we're going to go through hairs and a bunch of giants that were found and stuff. But I'll show you a lot of the craniums are very similar and all these kinds of things like this. So hopefully by the end of about the 3 shows here, that you'll clearly see that the odds of each time, if you're a scientific person or a skeptic and looking at this in this sort of way, right? That each time that these people hallucinated this, and where they're putting out rewards for the murderers of these kinds of things and all this sort of thing, it's not feasible. I mean, seriously, it's impossible that every place, everywhere, all over the world, the guy tells you the same sort of things. But it's fully feasible that hundreds of these have been supposedly shot or killed over the ages, right? It's not common because, again, you have to have extremely rare circumstances to be able to sort of do this. And Sasquatch researchers, everybody, they're not sort of getting this one aspect of it, that when you come along and you got this sort of thing, now you put out this camera, these guys are smelling you. They know, they understand and know to evade the traps. As I mentioned in my previous show, they did a over 10-year study on these gorillas and other sorts of ape species, and all of them were able to avoid the camera and knew it was there way before they ever came along to it. They could actually somehow tell, even after months of it sitting there. So the same thing I would suggest would apply, right? The reason we're not finding them, they live in caving systems like this. All kinds of people have found all kinds of interesting evidence inside of caves of, carcasses that were dragged up. It dragged up a giant mountain. I saw one that was fascinating. It's a flat mountain with this cave about 3/4 way up in it, right? So it's impossible, like even a human doing this, the guy would have had to put special sort of things to even climb up this because it's completely flat. you get in this sort of thing. They found a great big sort of a deer carcass that was sort of freshly sort of there, stripped to the bone, like as if it was something a human would do, where they picked at it and all this sort of thing, right? I mean, these things are crazy. So to suggest that each time it's, you know what I mean, it was imaginary when you have all these kinds of physical sorts of evidence and also of giant skulls and different body parts here, that you're just not correlating to Bigfoot. You're just saying you think they're giant humans, but I mean, if you add up all the stories, obviously the Bigfoot guy then must live with the giant humans, because you're finding the giant humans in the caves. So if you don't want to believe that Bigfoot's giant humans a lot of times, then that must mean that also that hairy ape men that are gorilla-like sort of thing, Gigantopithecus, also lives in the exact same environment and would also be a rival then of wild ancient humans, right? That are also would be in there. Okay, so even if you want to go by this sort of route, no matter what, we do know that we found giants in these kinds of caves all over the place and burial mounds, right? And that sort of thing like this. And everybody keeps reporting them in the same kinds of locations, except they're calling it Bigfoot, right? Do you not see the correlation here, Mr. Scientist? Right? I mean, seriously, you just cannot. I'm an historian, and I'm telling you, historically speaking, it is impossible that this was made up. It is impossible. There's no way that a guy from Rome is going to describe that a Roman wild man ran out and started shooting, hurling rocks at the Roman soldiers. The same thing as a native guy going by in his canoe and a giant boulders are being shot at him. Come on, and exactly the same breakage of trees mentioned some even thousands of years ago. Some weird stuff. There's some old, really old book. I've lost whatever the title. I'm terrible for the names of certain things, but there was this fascinating account where this guy went into this sort of forest, and he said that there it looked like giants must have lived there, because the trees were busted and bent all around and twisted in different areas, and they had made all these sort of strange sort of structures. But the guy had noted that it wasn't done. It seemed to have been had to have been done by like some kind of animal or giant of some sort, because it wasn't made like in the regular sort of like what a human would do, right? And all kinds of researchers have found these sorts of strange sorts of things out there all over the place, right? And so we'll cover some of that as well, and all kinds of things from the beds to the different things. But I'll show you piles of more killings, more reports, more sorts of things like that. And I also cover a lot of these in the 7 hours of Sasquatch. There's a part two for some reason. I guess I don't have it on the same playlist. So the part two is covers some more modern sorts of things like that, if you haven't seen it or whatever, right? So I'm trying to make these better as I go along, and maybe a bit split them up and that sort of thing, so they're easier for people to sort of watch. But the idea is that I'm telling you, I'm starting to like every year more and more people are going out in these forests and this sort of thing like that. These creatures are not going to be amongst us eventually, right? And whatever they are, wild humans at the end of the day. Yes, some must have been from feral sort of things. I'm positive a certain amount of them are from that sort of thing as well. But maybe the feral ones from thousands of years ago, there's been groups that have just survived, right? A small amount of numbers of them enough. They every time they ran across the natives, they eventually knew that they'd be their enemy, and they hide from them and that sort of thing like that, or get them by sneaking up on them, or these kinds of things, right? But they learn to avoid us and this sort of thing. So fascinating. So I mean, you gotta wonder, like, I mean, as a scientific person or a skeptic or anything, how is it feasible that every single time that if you asked a mathematician, they would tell you that this would be massive millions to one, that each time the person could imagine the same exact thing, right? And also when they're serious and you got deaths and recordings of things that are not human, okay, and this sort of thing, and all kinds of ones, like I said, over the ages, where they find these fur that look completely different from our kind of hair that we have, right? But they still say that they're 99% human with anomalies quite often, right? What this is the thing. This is, I mean, but the researchers around the world, a lot of them, Mr. A few of them actually agreed with me back in the day. They used to, some of them did believe they were probably more wild humans than that sort of thing. So no, some of them do agree with me on this sort of subject, but a lot of them don't. And this sort of thing like this, and they just because they started preaching the Gigantopithecus thing ages ago, and of course you're going to stick with it. You don't want to stop midway and all of a sudden now say, well, no, yeah, it makes them feel that maybe then people wouldn't find that what they're saying is credible, right? But and I highly love all these researchers. I mean, there's all kinds of them I would love to meet. Like I knew Mr. Krantz there. I used to talk to him sometimes and things like that because I had found some old books mentioning these giant bones that they had found, and I thought maybe since he was up in some of these regions, maybe he could backtrack this and find out where they went, and maybe they were a Bigfoots and that sort of thing like that. So there's some wonderful people out in the industry that are, really knowledgeable and that sort of thing. But I notice a lot of people do the same kind of things. They're all following Mr. Babnick there with these pheromone chip sort of things. I don't believe in these whatsoever. I think this is a complete massive waste of time. There is no proof whatsoever that they're a gorilla or any of this sort of thing. And even if they are, if they've been in our North American market now for ages, they probably change and probably smell slightly different and all kinds of things like that. And probably wouldn't be the same anyways, right? So the thing is that we need to get away from a lot of these sorts of things, putting up apples and all these weird sort of things. What people need to do if you really want to prove this and stop having skeptics bugging you, you need to find a long-term investment here, not just going on these silly shows, going around chasing Bigfoot every week at new properties. I mean, if you really believed he was there, why wouldn't you stay, right? I mean, obviously the creature has some kind of, now some of them are rogue, of course a certain amount of them are, but I mean if you get consistent sightings over 10 years where somebody's seeing one every half a year or something like that, obviously this creature isn't going far from there, or a few of them or whatever, and this is now you got a spot. Now you have to start going way more into this camera things by getting them way up in trees, getting them at different angles so that no matter what, when this guy comes through from even a mile away, some of them are going to start picking it up and recording him moving along and walking in all the different areas that he went. So you're going to have trap camera one in this. Yeah, put some down on the ground, hide some up even hidden in the ground, pointing up at a different sort of angle. These things need to be done. People, I noticed the same thing. They always put the up at around the height of them. Of course, the Bigfoot guy's going to see this, and he's smelling you. He's already probably saw your footprints walking around. Do you not think Bigfoot would track if you were a wild human, right? And let's say you had the basic intelligence of I don't know, a moron level of some sort, right? You probably still would be smart enough to sort of realize that you know what I mean. You've seen a pathway where wild pigs run up and down them. Now you know this is a spot where they go, right? So you would learn to track. You would see their footprints and things like that. I would suggest that even a lower IQ creature here would easily be able to probably do sort of things like this, right? So, anyways, the first part here was a bit of a shorter one, but I'm fixing my. I have a fascinating. I'm going to do one mystery show. This is only for my subscribers here and the people that watch these shows. I'm going to send you to my fishing show, and I'm going to show you a historic proof of giant monster sort of fish that seemingly now are extinct except in a few waters worldwide, where there was a giant monster pike in the past that used to be at least probably about 10 feet long. And this sort of thing, but there's still some of these reported in a few sort of areas, including some with eyeballs the size of saucers and this sort of thing. And I'm gonna teach you a bit of a sort of a thing, and we're going to do a bit of a mystery hunt along the Ottawa River, and we're going to be hunting some giant sort of Esox like sort of thing. Sadly, the time we're doing this isn't perfect timing for the real monsters, but I'll show you some real monsters mixed in with them and sort of thing like that. And so what I'll do is on the after I finish these shows, I'll put the link on it, and then you can go to my other channel, and if you want to subscribe, great, because there'll be 5 billion of them, and you'll see over time there I'll cover every kind of aspect of sort of angling that you can sort of think of, and you'll be totally astonished by some of the fish you're going to see on some of the shows and that sort of thing, and urban waters where people think there's no fish living in them and this sort of thing. But I'm going to cover some historic sort of accounts of werewolves around there, and some Ottawa River monster sightings and some other things, and then teach us about we're going to be using an old suic bait, one of the earlier musky baits I ever started off with in the later 60s, and we'll cover some of that, and I'll show you around, and we'll do a bit of a tour and that sort of thing to start off my show for the other shows and that sort of thing. So anyways, hopefully you enjoyed this bit of a shorter presentation here and that sort of thing, but it's just the correlation. I'm just a person that cannot keep stating in my mind, well, I'm incredible. I'm the world's greatest fisherman. I've been on the Ottawa River all my life. I know that it's impossible. There couldn't be another fish out there. I would never say that. Every so many years, there's a new species found around in the Ottawa sort of river there where they didn't list them before, right? I have over 120, some 130, I think it is, but officially they only list about 90 some. But there's even been buffalo fish in the Ottawa River before, smallmouth buffalo, bowfins, and different ones that have popped up, sharks even, and all kinds of things like that. So they're not what you'd call probably fish that live in there all the time, but the thing is they still exist. Okay, and this is the point: is that scientists are, they got to start learning that it's as long as there's an ability from the ocean of waterways to meander into things. Yes, sharks and all kinds of wayward seaward creatures can actually make it up into these things and survive. I have evidence of this in historic newspaper articles of even over a month of a giant basking shark, another one a whale shark, where it was stuck in a stream, surviving for well over a month, swimming around no problem, never suffocating from the salt water like they claim, and all this foolishness that they talk about. He only died because the locals started getting giant spears, and the water got lower, and he got trapped in a certain spot, and they all started spearing him, right? Proving 100% that the creature can survive a longer. I'm not saying that the shark can survive for 100 years in there. What I'm stating to you is they can certainly survive, obviously, months swimming around and doing these things. There's all kinds of records of people. There's films you can even watch of people reeling. There's one around the Great Lakes there. The guy reeled in one, and all kinds of things like that. And these are the sharks fully feeding. He's breathing properly and everything, yet he's about 1,000 miles inland from the ocean. Okay, so this is another thing that scientists deny all the time because they don't want to cause people worried about a great white shark in your river, right? But the odds of that is again a zillion to one. But the thing is that these things do occur. All kinds of species. There's over 80 species of sharks that I have listed that were found in fresh water, caught on rods and reels, speared, all kinds of things, right? And so any scientists that would deny this again, these guys, it's, to me, they sound that they're not really knowledgeable about the subjects, right? And this is what I'm saying. So for even if you're the biggest skeptic going, you cannot keep knocking historic sort of things here, especially when you even have photographs of them, and every time to say it's a guy in a monkey suit or this and that. I mean, it gets a bit silly, right? So the skeptical side sounds more silly to me than the non-skeptical side, in the sense that I could fully believe that a wild human could easily hide in any group of trees. When I was in BC, I could walk 2 feet and hide in behind a tree. You'd never see me in a trillion years, guaranteed. I could hide from you for months in there, no problem. You wouldn't be able to find you, right? And this sort of thing. There's all kinds of wild people that live out in the wilderness that nobody's ran across. They're wild sort of people. They're not feral. They're not living in caves. They're just hobo hippies, this sort of thing, prospectors, all kinds of stuff. And a lot of them do get fairly furry too. But the thing is that they were taught English and they moved out on their own accord for these reasons. They weren't ran out of town by the village or didn't have hypertrichosis or these kinds of things. But there's all kinds of people that live out in these things and can easily hide from us. So you're telling me that a giant sort of obviously somewhat intelligent human-like being sort of creatures here that are similar to us. I'm not saying they're exactly the same as a typical human Joe, except for the feral ones, but I'm saying over time that these guys that may have been or originated from that ages ago changed, right? Some of them in certain groups are giants, right? And this sort of thing. So whatever the real explanation at the end of the day of how their origin came from, this I can't 100% prove. But the thing is to deny that Sasquatch-like creatures have been killed, shot, have killed people, and all these kinds of things. When you have these consistent historic records all over the world, I just picked one area here. This is just one, and look at all the sort of things that we ran across just in this one little section, right? So I mean, you got to admit there's some really interesting sort of things out there. So we'll continue on. I'll cover a whole bunch more of U.S. ones and different ones from other countries and places like that, and some other sorts of evidence, DNA, like more modern sort of things, and a bunch of other sort of things that we'll mix it all together. Where at the end of the day, I'm just saying, if you're an historian, you believe that Christopher Columbus went here and did this and that. Nobody's questioning these sort of things. But when Marco Polo tells you that he saw a Tyrannosaurus Rex, now all of a sudden you can't believe him, right? But I'm saying when you have gazillions of historians all telling you the same thing, and every random people all telling you the same thing and making drawings the same, it's impossible that the guy, like I said, in a Roman cave could have known what a native guy from the Iroquois tribe would be seeing, let's say, around this region, right? It's impossible. So there's only one logical explanation, that wild humans do live amongst us, have been hiding amongst us since time began, a certain thing, and they, whatever, I don't know how intelligent they really are or whatever. Like I said, some may be more intelligent than the next group or whatever, and that sort of thing like this. But fully, besides that, and also the feral sort of chimp-like things where people let their pets loose, gorillas, all that, that's a certain portion of the things that are being seen as well. And who knows? How do you know that maybe I don't know, a gorilla and an orangutan. I don't know if that's even possible to mix, but let's say there was such a thing. There could be. I've never actually looked this up, but let's say there was, right? And let's say some guy had a zoo and there was, I don't know, 4 orangutans and 4 gorillas. Now all of a sudden you got a gorilla, right? Well, maybe they look really weird, right? And then maybe a bunch of them get leaped out and sort of, and now even though they have this close genetics and maybe the odd one's a freak or whatever, it could be that that's how something like that could have even started, where you create a new like ape-like thing, right? Or whatever. Who knows? Like, I mean, all these kinds of things are feasible, right? But the thing is I'm just telling the other researchers out there, you need to start looking way more back into historic sort of things. You're going to see the biggest skeptic. I see these guys, they always put these shows where you got two gung-ho guys where everybody believes Bigfoot's right here. Oh no, that's Bigfoot. He's Bigfoot. Everything's Bigfoot. Like some of these shows are mind boggling where the guy, if something made a snap in the tree forest, immediately it's Bigfoot. I'm not crazy like this. I understand that no, that's probably not Bigfoot, right? But the thing like this, but the thing is that to when you have to understand that historically speaking, it's impossible that all these sorts of things are just made up, right? So for the skeptic guy that they have on the show with them, they sound silly a lot of times because they talk foolishness like well, it can't be like this. How do you know this? What do you mean it can't be? Are you living in the forest 24 hours a day? And this sort of thing. And why would any human being with somewhat of an intelligence, if I knew some guy, people are coming by, right away, I don't know if they're going to kill me, harm me, or whatever. I'm going to observe them, right? And I'm certainly not going to come running out and attack 10 or 20 of them unless I got rabies or something. I'm half crazy, right? So what do you think these guys are going to do? Either two things. Either they're going to observe you and you're not going to know that they're there, or then they start leaving. You can't follow them, even if you got dogs and everything. This guy can run 10 times faster and cover terrain that you can't cover. So eventually the doggie's going to get lost by a stream somewhere that he leaped across or whatever, and they're going to lose the trail. Or he goes into his caving system and he's gone down there into some subterranean tunnel that could be miles long, who knows, whatever, right in the area, and you're not going to see him. And this is the thing, and we've already found their bones gazillions of times in all kinds of caves worldwide. We're just not correlating that they're really the same thing. And this is what what I'm telling you, right? So, so no matter what, at the end of the day, skeptical or not, to deny when people are being killed, police posses are running after this sort of thing. Everybody's telling you they're not seeing a guy, you know, Bugsy with a big switchblade hair running around. That's what always occurs when a normal murder like the sort of did you see when let's see some of these famous murderers from way back in the day, right? You didn't see like all of a sudden everybody starts saying it was Bigfoot or a dragon that was eating them and things like this. They always it was a human, right? And that sort of thing, because some people even saw a flash of the guy or whatever, right? So in cases like this, when everybody's telling you that it was a big furry wild man, why are we denying them? Right? When the consistency is impossible, this is all made up, right? Even the Bible, like I say, mentions a race of giants and all these kinds of things, right? And even all kinds of weird things, right? There's so many historic records everywhere that I'll do several more shows on this, but it's quite interesting, right? So I highly love all the researchers out there. There's lots of them I'd like to meet and sort of things like that. But some of the ones that I used to talk to, the earlier guys, a lot of them did believe that some of them, like Peter Byrne especially, he was fairly convinced that they were probably more wild humans. And so I tend to agree with him and that sort of thing like this. And I think a lot of people have a problem with it when we're looking at them, especially like Patty and stuff like that. She looks so gorilla-ish like, right? But I mean, this could be simply over the ages that they've developed these sorts of things, but originally they were a typical sort of maybe like human, right? And this sort of thing. But over time they've sort of, changed, right? To fit the environment bigger and that sort of thing like that. In other areas where they don't have this sort of thing, you'll notice that the Bigfoot creatures are a lot smaller in certain sections. In Alaska, they're giants, right? Like a lot of times in the Caucasus Mountains, and some of them 12, 13-foot giants, 15-foot, these crazy sort of stories, right? Where they're mega, sort of giants, right? And a lot of these fossils that they found of these mega sort of giants, some they're claiming now, they keep changing it. They used to say all the time, oh, all these things were impossible. Now modern scientists with new so-called modern methods of dating things are dating them much earlier, and some are saying like 7, 8,000, 10,000, 5,000 years. years, which is completely with man here, right? So now they're stating that they must have been probably killed off by early humans, some of them, and that exactly what I've been preaching to you all along, right? But now more scientists are getting on board with this and that sort of thing like that, and also with the flood sort of thing, and forgetting about the biblical aspect. They're just starting to understand that yes, there truly was a giant worldwide cataclysm flood of some sort. And this is what probably really caused all this sort of thing, right? Why we find layers of, you know what I mean, and all these sorts of things. This is the real truth, not this sort of thing. So whether the Earth itself is actually millions of years old, this is really hard to know, right? But the thing is that these creatures were around in much more modern times than what they're stating. Their methods of dating things, like I said, is not accurate. It can't be proven, and sort of that sort of thing like that. So even if you're going to go by their 5, 10,000 years sort of dating that they're doing nowadays, the point is that there was giant megafauna not that long ago. So it's very possible that some of these small numbers have still continued on, right, of these sorts of things. And not only that, there's other sort of creatures like the Wahila and these other sorts of ones out there that the same kind of idea, right? So anyways, this the first part of it here, but I think this is quite fascinating and very interesting sort of a subject, right? And so for skeptical to keep sort of, and you'll see by the time I finish with the cave giants and all these kinds of things, and physical evidence of today and some DNA and all that sort of thing, to completely say this was all just hallucinations by people, then you can't be helped. Obviously, you're just gonna, no matter what, unless Bigfoot gives you a big kiss and sits on your lap, you're still not gonna accept this, right? But hopefully that I'll be able to at least stir a few years here, where if you're scientific people, then you gotta wonder in your mind, yeah, you got to sort of wonder, right? Like, I mean, to consistently say that each time randomly around the world, people are make up the same sort of things, and when you do have physical bones out there that you're just not core understanding is really the same dude, right? Sort of thing. This what you're what the problem is. People are not getting that the giants that you're fighting in the caves are really the same as what we're still seeing. Okay. So, anyways, stay tuned to next show there, and hopefully you enjoyed this. And thanks for watching. We'll get our next one on here soon. Bye for now.